As you now know, there's a new branch of government in America. It's a fourth branch that has legislative power, even though you never elected them. And it's because they elected themselves. And the new branch's name is the Center for Disease Control. So it's the executive branch, the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and now the public health agency branch. And you didn't vote for this. You didn't consent to it. But this is the new America in which you're living. Among the powers the new fourth branch of government has given itself is the power to say who has to pay rent, who gets stiffed. And two times now, the CDC have gone rogue and simply said, hey, everybody, you don't owe rent anymore. And hey, you middle-class landlords who maybe own a rental property or two, go pound sand. Make your payment to the big banks anyway. And if you go broke, too bad. And you're probably white, rich, and everything else, every other stereotype, which means you didn't earn any of this anyway. Well, except that's not true. See, the CDC discovered that it can go way beyond its mandate. And they do this by ramping up fear and then making policy in the name of safety, whether it actually has anything to do with safety, science, or the law. And now the CDC, that's supposed to be an apolitical taxpayer-funded agency, has clearly been captured by Marxists, and now they want to come after your guns. And they want to do this by declaring that gun violence is a quote-unquote public health emergency, all for the purpose of regulating firearm ownership. Everything can be a public health emergency if you want to control it. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky told CNN just in August that it was time to do something. Watch.
I swore to the president and to this country that I would protect your health. This is clearly one of those moments, one of those issues that is harming America's health. My job is to understand and evaluate the problem, to understand the scope of the problem, to understand why this happens and what are the things that can make it better, to research that, to scale that up, to evaluate it, and to make sure that we can integrate it into communities. We have a lot of work to do in every single one of those areas because we haven't done a lot of work as a nation in almost any of them.
Yeah, guess what their work includes? Yeah, they always say do something, but the something includes funding just pro-gun control studies. Now, the CDC and the National Institutes of Health, they're funding new research on firearms to help, quote-unquote, reduce firearm-related injuries, death, crime, and suicides. And among several other research projects, they're apparently now going to provide funding to 10 state health departments, and they will start collecting data in near real time on emergency room non-fatal firearm injuries. And they say that it will allow doctors and epidemiologists to, quote, identify trends and craft swift interventions. Swift interventions. Remember, this is the science crowd. Now, we all know what they say when they say follow the science, what that means. It means do what we tell you to do. And they appeal to their own authority, so you can't ask questions because they're the CDC. They're not asking, they're issuing an edict. And they use the word science. It's a rubber stamp that otherwise they wouldn't. I mean, really, it's the administration bypassing the legislative branch and doing everything through the CDC because magical public health emergency. That's what's exactly going on. Now, here's the thing. Democrats love to claim that the CDC was barred from research of gun violence by pro-Second Amendment groups. Except this is a lie. They've said this over and over again. I've heard it for the past, 8 years now, except it's a lie. State-run and funded media outlet NPR tweeted out the lie anyway, and they said, quote, for decades, the gun lobby and GOP allies have effectively blocked federal funding for firearm research, creating a tangled mess of unreliable data that obscures the true toll of firearm injuries. And these stories shed light on this. So they did this their whole thing. They set it all up with, so far, the CDC has not at all been able to study anything related to firearms. And this was repeated by a number of Democrats, including Representative Marie Newman, who also tweeted out the same lie because they apparently have no idea what is law and what isn't. She tweeted, for decades, the gun lobby has prevented the CDC from studying gun violence. Now, under POTUS, we can finally address it for what it is, a public health crisis, end quote. Except it's not. It's a criminal issue, but more on that in a minute. The truth is that the CDC was never barred from researching gun violence in the first place. So back in 1996, during the battle over an omnibus bill, there was a provision that was called the Dickey Amendment that was slipped into this omnibus bill, and it barred the use of taxpayer dollars to advocate for or against gun control. The language was precise. Here's the language. It stated, quote, that none of the funds made available for injury prevention and control at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention may be used to advocate or promote gun control, end quote. So it's pretty crystal clear, advocate for. It's pretty crystal clear. So what's going on here? the left wants to politicize science and try to restrict firearms using your and my tax dollars to do so. And they want to lie and say they were prohibited from doing so and say that they were barred from researching anything related to firearms. All the law prohibited was using your taxpayer dollars to fund and advocate for gun control. Now, here's the thing. The CDC could have studied something that's actually a little bit, that actually would matter. Like, for instance, the benefits of the family unit and curtailing juvenile crime, or maybe the mental health value of having fathers in the home, but they didn't do any of that. They don't do any of that because that would actually go towards the narrative that they want to work against, which is that matters in the home. No, government raising your kids. Now, here's the thing. They want to use this to restrict your firearms. So in any case, the CDC chose to not conduct at all whatsoever any firearms related studies, and they stifle their own research so as to promote gun control with these pro-gun control studies. They destroyed their own gun control narrative in the 90s, by the way, when they found that lawful defensive gun usage vastly outmeasured criminal usage. And in a recent study from 2008 that was commissioned under Obama-Biden, you know what they found? That almost all national survey estimates indicated that defensive gun uses by victims are at least as common as offensive uses by criminals, with estimates of annual usages ranging from about 500,000 to more than 3 million in the context of about 300,000 violent crimes involving firearms in 2008. And this, by the way, was also confirmed by a number of criminal researchers, including some who are not at all Republican or conservative. So the CDC decided to sit on this. They actually, back in the 90s, when they were studying the same thing that challenged the pro-2A and the self-defense narrative, what they actually did was sit on it and they never published it. And they didn't really make a lot of hay out of this either. Now, the CDC doesn't like to report these findings because it contradicts the narrative. Now, remember, the CDC, they're using politics as science, and this is further evidenced by one of their top officials, Mark Rosenberg. He was the director of National Center for Injury Prevention under the CDC at the time. Now he's president and CEO of the Task Force for Global Health. Now, in the 90s, he laid all his cards on the table for his plans to treat guns as a public health crisis. He said, quote, "We need to revolutionize the way that we look at guns, like what we did with cigarettes. It used to be that smoking was a glamour symbol, cool, sexy, and macho, and now it's dirty, deadly, and banned," end quote. They wanted to Joe Camel firearms. I wrote about this in my first book. So the folks on the left, including health agencies like the CDC, they've dreamed of making the Second Amendment a health issue so they can ban it and regulate it like cigarettes, right? You don't have a constitutional right to burying cigarettes. But there's more. When it was discovered that the CDC inflated firearm fatality numbers to boost their narrative, they actually dragged their feet for 2 years before finally correcting it. You're not surprised. I mean, it's the follow the science CDC. They only care about their far left ideological agendas and how the CDC can advance them.